Discontented Ghost, Chapter 15. The rest of the day was a trial to me, for although there was so much to be done it made my head swim, none of it could be done before nightfall, so there was nothing for it but to wait. Never had I looked forward with such eagerness to Lady Eleanor's nightly visit. When she finally appeared, I was so exhilarated I seized her in my arms and gave her a hearty buss. "Simon!" She pushed me away with a breathless little laugh. "Whatever is the matter with you?" "Ellie, I've got it. I've got the whole lot wrapped up in one big bundle." "Sit down." "No, here, take the best chair, dear. I'm too excited to sit anyway. Now, to begin with." I showed her my father's memoirs and read her the pertinent passages, as Mudge would have called them. By the time I finished, her eyes were shining as hopefully as mine. "Those last words of his now," I said when I concluded my readings. Which of his many precious possessions might he have been referring to when he said those words? Which would he treasure above all others? I say, the one he risked his life for. "Of course." "Very well, then. So I hardly need to tell you what our first step must be," I said, and proceeded nonetheless to explain it. Lady Eleanor was quick to agree. "Then we'll meet at midnight to test my theory," I said. "Be sure to bring the necessary equipment I mentioned. As for the rest of my plan, there's much to be done. For one thing, I must have a diamond ring." "A diamond ring? Why?" I explained the rest of my plan. She stared at me and sat back, shaking her head in amazement. "Mad, mad, mad," she breathed. "Still, it just might work." "It's got to. Now how about Mrs. Otis? Surely she must have some diamonds among her jewelry." Lady Eleanor shook her head. "So far as I know, and I've had a look, just out of feminine curiosity, the only diamonds she has are in the rings she wears. You can't very well creep into the master bedroom and strip one off her finger now, can you?" "But I must have." "Wait a minute. The young Duke has one." "What? Cecil?" "Yes, that's another thing I learned from his valet. Cecil brought along a diamond solitaire, hoping to put it to good use. I believe it's in the waistcoat pocket of his grey suit. The one with the pinstripes and the narrow lapels?" "Yes, I'll get it." "But what if he misses it in the morning?" "I'll return it before then." "Well, all right. But are you sure you can find that passage?" "Yes. It will mean an hour or two in the library after we've finished with our errand, but I'm sure I can remember which book it's in, once I have a chance to search the shelves." "All right, then. I can tell you one thing. We had better move fast. You haven't heard the latest development." "What's that?" "Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson are coming tomorrow." "No." "Yes. They will arrive at the Ascot railway station on the 10:40 morning train from London." I can assure you this message seemed to transmit itself into dots and dashes straight up my spine. Yet, side by side with consternation went a strangely stimulating thrill of satisfaction. "I knew it," I said. "Trust him not to go baying off after a false scent. He won't be far behind us. Let us not forget that he has been very successful with jewels." "Yes, indeed. What's more, I have learned that Lord Canterville is coming, too. In fact, it was he who asked Mr. Holmes to take a hand in the case." It was with a mystic sense of exultation that I turned and looked down at Lady Eleanor. "So," I murmured, "the time has come at last, as I always knew it would some day. The time when I shall have to pit my wits against the greatest detective of them all, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." "It looks that way." "Well, I can't begin operations until everyone in the house is retired. That will give us 12 hours before he arrives on the scene. Everything must be accomplished before that time." Lady Eleanor stood up. "Do you think we can do it, Simon?" "We can only try," I told her, and took her again into my arms. Her lips were soft and her body melted against mine, till suddenly she sprang back with a cry. "Simon," she gasped, "I can't believe it." "Ellie," I cried, "it's a special dispensation." For an instant she stood transfixed. Then seductively Lady Eleanor returned to my arms. "Let's make sure," she said. It was a new ghost who walked the corridors of Canterville Chase that night. A ghost who, in perhaps an unprecedented way, had re-established contact with an important condition of humanity. And my whole viewpoint was changed. Gone were old grudges. I simply longed now to see everyone in the world happily paired off. I not only wished connubial bliss for Virginia and her young duke, I hoped that Wash would gather his rosebud while he might. I was everybody's friend. When I reached the main corridor that led to the family bedrooms and the principal guest rooms, a welcome silence greeted me. Everyone had retired to rest. Despite my euphoria, I was careful to keep a sharp eye out for any strings stretched across the passage or nutshells strewn on the floor, another of the twins' tricks, since I still could not bring myself quite to trust them. But nothing of the sort impeded my progress. It was without incident that I gained the door of the royal bedchamber. Though I entered with the greatest caution, I was not afraid of rousing the young duke. Lads of his age slept like logs, I reminded myself. When I was able to observe him as he lay dreaming away under the great feathered canopy of the stately bed, I felt certain I could proceed with safety. Furthermore, the way I came and went, the place was beginning to be familiar territory. One would think the appurtenances of a royal bedchamber would be kept in proper repair, but standards, now that beheading by royal decree had gone out of fashion, were no longer what they once were. During my previous visit, I had come to understand that the door of the great armorial wardrobe was ajar simply because the catch no longer worked properly. And this time, when I eased it open, it creaked alarmingly. With my heart in my throat, I froze and waited. Apart from stirring restlessly and flopping over onto his stomach, however, Cecil continued to slumber. Now it was a question of pawing through his clothing, looking for the gray suit with the pinstripes and the narrow lapels. At last I found it. My trembling fingers sought the waistcoat pockets, and in the second one pinched together on the hard, cold facets of a large gem. I drew it forth and saw I was holding a diamond solitaire ring of truly ducal proportions, especially for so young a duke. It occurred to me to wonder how the scallywag had managed to provide himself with so expensive a persuader, but any such speculation was a side issue just then. Besides, at that very instant, something happened that scattered my thoughts like chaff before the wind. Cecil whirled in his bed like a top and sat straight up, crying, "No, no, Lord Grubb, I will not return to Eton." Of all times to have a nightmare, he had picked the worst. With a reaction more human than ghostly, I dropped to the floor and slid under the bed. Well, it seems as if every last person at Canterville Chase, including Miss Virginia, came running down the corridor into the young Duke's room within the next 30 seconds. Fuming amid the dust and cobwebs under the bed, those maids would have to be given a good dressing down. I listened helplessly while everyone tried to console the young Duke and assure him he had merely had a nightmare, and while Cecil, blushing no doubt, responded with vague and misleading answers as to the contents of his dreams. At any instant, watching the twins' feet scamper about, I expected to find myself in an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with them, when for some reason they decided to look under the bed. After a moment, Mrs. Otis left the room and returned shortly with an announcement, which did not surprise me in the least. "Sir," she said, "here is an efficacious remedy I hope you will try. It is Dr. Dobell's tincture. It is remarkably successful in combating a variety of malaises, insomnia being among them. One spoonful of this, and you will sleep like a babe." Docilely, the young Duke allowed himself to be dosed. I squeezed my eyes shut at the sheer horror of it, but what could I do? After what seemed an interminable time, Cecil was finally tucked into bed and everybody left. Somewhere a mellow-throated clock rolled the third quarter of the hour. I longed to groan a churchyard groan, though of course that would have been inadvisable. Much more of this, and I would be late for my midnight tryst with Lady Eleanor. It may be you are beginning to consider me an easily panicked ghost. Why, you may be wondering, did I not pull myself together and vanish through the wainscoting the instant Cecil stirred? The answer is that I had a special problem on my hands which precluded any such vanishing. Oh, I could have vanished all right, but what about the ring I was clutching? A diamond is the hardest substance known to man. It was one thing to thin yourself out to the vanishing point, But just you try to thin out a diamond and see how far you get. No, I had to escape from the room by conventional means, and soon. Above me, Cecil seemed to be settling down, and I was about to wriggle out from under the bed when the door opened and someone tiptoed in, causing me to withdraw like a startled snail into its shell. Cecil? The bed springs bounced violently, menacing my head as Cecil sat up again. Ginny, what are you doing here? He asked, rather hopefully, I thought. All this in whispers, of course. Oh, Cecil, she sounded close to tears. I have to know what's troubling you, and why you have been so distant. Is it something I have done? Well, as you might imagine, that was all it took to break down the reserve of anyone as susceptible as the young Duke. In no time at all, it was, oh no, my angel, how could you do anything that would, well, dash it all, you know I love you, and there is nothing I want to do more than to ask you to be mine. Only... Then the whole story about the fatal clause in the marriage contract was poured out. And after asking each other what they could do about it, and agreeing that they had to do something, but didn't know what to do, the young lovers fell silent and sat side by side and doubtless hand in hand on the edge of the bed. I began to hope fervently that Miss Virginia had really received as proper an upbringing as Lady Eleanor felt she had. If those two became any more impulsive, I might never get away. I longed to cry out, I'm all for love, children, but not now. Upbringing told, however, and after a few ecstatic kisses, Virginia rose to go. Now you stay in bed in the morning, poor boy, and don't even think about getting up for a ride in the park, she ordered happily. I'll go for a trot myself. I now know that it isn't because you don't care for my company. Care? You know nothing is more precious to me. I long to propose to you again, and if you don't believe it, I can even show you something that will prove it. Wait, I'll get it. It's in my waistcoat pocket. Beneath the bed, one who was already pale as a ghost turned even paler. Now there would be another outcry, and... No, don't you dare. Virginia's voice was low but intense. I don't want to see, whatever it is, until I can... Despite her growing incoherence, Cecil caught enough of the drift of the objections to bow to them. Oh, very well. Perhaps you're right. Well, good night, my beloved. Good night, my prince. Duke, Prince, I love you both. The door closed, but I still held my breath. Would Cecil be moved to take a sentimental look at the ring anyway, now that the subject had come up? For a moment there was no sound except for his heavy breathing. Then after an eternity, he turned and came back to bed. But it was some time before his respiration became regular enough to allow me to escape.